Hello everyone, it is I. So, upon seeing the title, you might be wondering, wait, didn't you already review the original like a year ago? Yes, I did. But this particular review is a remaster of episode 1. The reason why I'm doing this is because the Brumakian podcast has expanded into another platform called Podbean. Podbean, for those who don't know, is a podcast publishing and monetization service providing free and premium hosting packages for individuals and businesses. Podbean also offers a user-friendly interface that integrates publishing, management, syndication, and analysis tools into an easy-to-use podcasting package. By the way, this video is not a sponsor, because if it was, you guys would shout, "Sell out immediately." Anyway, the other reason why I wanted to do this is because I wanted to re-record all of the episodes from episode 1 to 49. And it's also because of YouTube's copyright system that continues to piss me off. So all of the remastered episodes will be exclusively on Podbean. Now you might be wondering, well shoot, how do I acquire this? Well, you can go on the official website, or if you want to listen to any podcast you're choosing on the go, then you can download it on your smartphone, either on an iPhone or Android. And it's free. Just type in Brumakian podcast and there it is. Again, not sponsored. Luckily for you guys, you get to see, or listen in this case, to episode 1 remastered right here, right now. This is the only time that I'm doing this, so don't expect anything else. So, like I said, this is a remaster of the first episode. Expect nothing but a little more history and more in-depth analysis. So, without further delay, here is the audio of episode 1, A Legend is Born. A remastered edition. My name is Demetrius, and on this particular show, the Brumakian podcast, I will go into great detail on any medium of entertainment, whether it be tokusatsu films, anime, and video games. For the next 50 weeks, I will go over every Godzilla film from 1954 all the way up to the release of Godzilla vs. Kong, to which, at the time of this recording, will be coming out on a streaming service. From the dark, the light, the in-between, and the sometimes straight-up bizarre, I will cover them all. I will also review other giant monster movies from other studios in Japan to American monster movies. And of course, we start off where it all began. Well, kind of. You see, that's not actually true. Sure, the movie I'm reviewing is the one that gets the ball rolling in terms of the genre, but there are others that came before. So to understand how this film came to be and what legacy it left behind is to go back to the 19th century when feudal Japan became important. Japan was entering over 200 years of peace, prosperity, and growth when its shogun, 200 years prior, closed down the entire country, meaning no one can leave or come in. Well, except for the Dutch. And yet, the feudal Japan days were coming to an end in 1853 when the United States Navy arrived, led by Commodore Matthew Perry. The Americans were not there to take no for an answer. They simply said, with their huge gunboats, "Open the damn country already or we'll open fire." Soon after, Japan opened its doors to the world. But this has an effect. After the opening of Japan, it saw its big changes. Case in point, the Meiji Restoration, an event that restored practical imperial rule to the Empire of Japan in 1868 under Emperor Meiji. Towards the end of the 19th century, going into the 20th century, Japan would get involved with wars, proxy or otherwise. From the First Sino-Japanese War, a war between Japan and mainland China that lasted from 1894 to 1895, to a shocking victory over the Russian Empire in the Russo-Japanese War of 1904, to the First World War in 1914, or the Great War as it was called back then. War to end all wars. Don't make me laugh. Even though Japan barely got involved in World War I, they still did some things during the war. They took territorial islands that were owned by Germany,
which just had war declared on it by Britain because Britain was friends with Belgium, which was being trespassed by Germany in order to get to France to kick France's ass because France is friends with Russia, who was getting ready to kick Austria's ass because Austria was getting ready to kick Serbia's ass because someone from Serbia shot the leader of Austria's ass. Or actually shot him in the head.
When the war was over in 1918, Japan got to meet the nations and joined the League of Nations. Skipping ahead here, Japan has been experiencing a lot of expansion, in which they took over Chinese territory, Manchuria, in 1931, although they might have staged it. And then, in 1937, an incident on the Marco Polo Bridge ignites the Second Sino-Japanese War, and then Nanking happened. And an infamous event that kinda got swept under the rug, the RAPE of Nanking. Yes, that is an actual name of the event that actually happened, and no, I did not make that up. To talk about it briefly here, judging by that name, it is exactly what you think it is. Well, okay, look it up for yourself, but be cautious of what you find, and prepare to click off the page after reading 3 paragraphs. Anyway, getting back on topic here. The Second Sino-Japanese War happened while a Chinese civil war was happening at the same time, and back over in Europe, a chaotic maniac by the name of Adolf Hitler invaded Poland, kickstarting World War II. Speaking of World War II, when World War II began to heat up during the Battle of Britain, the United States, who were neutral at the time, decided to aid the British Empire with supplies that they need. As for Japan, the only thing that they received was an oil embargo, an act that prohibits giving Japan any oil since the Japanese Empire relied on American oil. So Japan had 2 options. Option A, find another way to make or find oil, or B, attack American naval ships at Pearl Harbor so that they can expand south to get more resources. They chose both of those options, and the result was, well, what you might expect.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Tell me if this sounds familiar. I fear all that we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve. If you haven't figured that out, that was a quote by Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Afterwards, Japan was at war against China, Britain, and the United States. In 1945, when Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy completely collapsed, it left Japan all by itself. Because of this, they became more and more aggressive. And when I say aggressive, I mean really aggressive. It was after the Battle of Okinawa that it became very apparent that something had to be done. So, get this. Originally, the US were planning to invade mainland Japan. The problem is that if it actually happened, they would have seen large death counts, even more greater than D-Day. So, the US had 2 options. Option A, go with their original plan, or B, try something different. Thankfully, they chose the latter, for better or for worse. From 1942 to 1945, the U.S. Air Force had been conducting firebombing raids on the city of Tokyo. In mid-1945, the empire was given an ultimatum: either surrender or face prompt and utter destruction. Japan refuses. At 8:15 a.m. on August 6, 1945, the U.S. dropped its secret weapon, an atomic bomb codenamed Little Boy, on the city of Hiroshima. When newly elected President Truman announced to the world of his existence and offering Japan another chance to surrender, the empire refuses again. So, another atomic bomb, codenamed Fat Man, was dropped on the city of Nagasaki 3 days later. Finally, on September 2, 1945, with a few documents of surrender on board the USS Missouri, World War II is over. It actually created some positive results, in which Japan itself, with the help of the U.S. occupation, was going through a post-war economic miracle. The negative results, however, was what was happening outside of the country's borders. It was known as the Cold War, a period of time where the United States and Russia, then the Soviet Union, or USSR for short, were engaged in not in an actual war, but in a political race to see who has better people, society, ideology, and everything else. Oh, did I forget to mention that by 1949, both sides are having a nuclear arms race to see who has the bigger bombs? Yeah, it was even worse when both sides upgraded from atom bombs to hydrogen bombs. Meaning, if a third world war broke out, it would be over faster than you could say nuclear blitz. And the planet was almost blown up 6 ways from Tuesday, twice. Anyway, the nuclear arms race was in effect during the 1950s, and you would assume that no innocent civilian would ever get caught in one of them, right? Well, that would be the case if it wasn't for an incident that sparked international attention in 1954. Bikini Atoll, a hotspot for American nuclear bomb tests to take place in. One of those tests held the largest hydrogen test in U.S. history. On the morning of March 1, 1954, the U.S. detonated its most powerful nuclear device of that time, a 15-megaton hydrogen bomb codenamed Castle Bravo. The bomb itself was actually more powerful than scientists originally predicted. Unfortunately, a fishing boat was a bit too close to its aftermath. A Japanese fishing vessel, the Lucky Dragon No. 5, oh the irony of that name, previously took 5 voyages across the Pacific Ocean to catch fish. Its last voyage was on January 2, 1954. And around late February, they turned right back to mainland Japan. However, on the morning of March 1st, the crew of the Lucky Dragon witnessed a giant mushroom cloud rising into the sky. And then a few seconds later, they heard a deafening explosion coming from the direction of Bikini Atoll. What happened afterwards was particles started to rain down onto the crew and the boat itself. The particles were so light, in fact, that it could be picked up by human hands and thrown overboard. When the crew made it back to Japan, illness was already taking a toll on them and the boat itself, and a large amount of fish that they caught were completely unedible for consumers. Now, what actually happened was that the crew of the Lucky Dragon, even though they were not in the blast radius itself, they were in the path of its radiation left behind. And the radiation was being carried by the particles that I mentioned a few seconds earlier. This is called fallout, the definition of which is the residual radioactive material propelled into the upper atmosphere following a nuclear blast, so called because it falls out of the sky after the explosion and the shockwave has passed. The more you know. Anyway, Japan accuses the US for making them puppets for another nuclear device, and soon the entire nation started an anti-nuclear movement. So to ease the tension, both Japanese and U.S. governments agreed to reach a political settlement, and the U.S. donates $15.3 million in compensation, and the survivors of the fallout received 2 million yen. That is about $52,800 in today's currency to each crewmate. Afterwards, the news of the Lucky Dragon incident spread worldwide. The information that was given to them had a profound effect. The fear of not the blast of a nuclear bomb, but the fallout that follows suit. The fear of nuclear bombs became more apparent. So much so that Hollywood and other countries decided to take that idea and just roll with it. During the 1950s, monster movies rolled around the idea of nuclear weapons awakening or transforming a monster or human and attacking humanity. Now we're getting into the monster stuff here. The first giant monster film to hit the big screen, believe it or not, was back in 1925 with the silent film The Lost World, with its special effects being done by Willis O'Brien. Now, you may look at that film today and think, that's nothing special. But remember, it was the first time that stop-motion animation was ever used. O'Brien made an even bigger achievement when he and his team adapted a novel in 1932 and created one of the most influential films of all time in 1933, King Kong, a movie so nice they remade it thrice. Actually, to touch on 33 Kong, since I didn't review that one, it is a classic like everyone else says, and I highly recommend it. Anyways, the film became a success even during the Great Depression. Also, it is important to note that television wasn't invented yet, so the only way to see movies back then was you had to go to the theater itself. The film will be re-released in the next coming decades. Yet, it was in 1952 that King Kong was released worldwide, making more money than back in 1933. In 1953, O'Brien's pupil turned legendary special effects director Ray Harryhausen created a special effects movie called The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. In the movie, the Rhedosaurus, that's the creature in the movie, was awakened by nuclear tests and wreaked havoc in New York City. Why does that sound so familiar? Anyway, while the movie wasn't nothing special, its effects were amazing and even surpasses O'Brien's effects by a margin. Then, other movie studios took note of the idea and concept and again, roll with it. But it would be back in Japan where a couple of former war criminals and a giant king that would set the standard for years to come. So let's get into it, yeah? So, you all know who Toho are, right? For those who don't know, founded on August 12, 1932 by Ichizo Kobayashi, Toho Company Limited is a Japanese production and distribution company. It has its headquarters in Chiyoda, Tokyo. I hope I said that one right. And is one of the core companies of the Henshin Toho Group. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the movie's production, yeah? In 1954, Toho originally was going to make a film in co-production with Indonesia called In the Shadow of Glory. That's actually kind of a cool name. However, the Indonesian government denied any Japanese producers entry because of anti-Japanese sentiment and World War II, of course. One of those producers was Tomoyuki Tanaka. Tanaka flew down to Indonesia to try and make negotiations and make peace with the people, but was unsuccessful. With the project dead in the water, Tanaka flew back to Japan, thinking of another way to make a movie. Then, from an inspiration of The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms and the Lucky Dragon incident, Tanaka decided that he would make a monster movie around the idea of a monster rising out of the ocean and attacking Tokyo. On his flight back home, he wrote an outline of the working title called The Giant Monster from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. A mouthful of a name that is. Jesus. Anyway, the idea was pitched to executive producer Iwao Mori. Mori was intrigued by the idea. However, his issue is that who would be the one to do the effects? Enter E.G. Tsuburaya. Now, you may recall that I mentioned former war criminals. Well, Tsuburaya was one of them. You see, Tsuburaya directed many propaganda film special effects during the Second Sino-Japanese War and World War II. One of them was a recreation of the Pearl Harbor attack. It was so impressive that it actually fooled the American soldiers, thinking that it was actual footage from the attack. After the war and during the occupation, Tsuburaya was branded as an association with propaganda films and found it hard to find work anywhere. In 1954, he was approached by Mori on the movie's concept and he agreed to take part in it and confirmed that it was financially possible. Next was the writer. 3 years previously, Tsuburaya submitted an outline of his own. It was to feature a giant octopus attacking some boats in the Indian Ocean. In order for it to come to life, producer Tanaka hired sci-fi horror novelist Shigeru Kayama. And originally, the monster was supposed to have gorilla-like interests in human females, and a scene of the beast attacking a lighthouse. Those ideas, however, were completely dropped for obvious reasons. Now, when it comes to the choice of director, Toho wanted Shinkichi Taniguchi to be the ideal director for Project G. The G is short for giant, by the way, since he was attached to the original in The Shadow of Glory. But later on, Taniguchi declined the offer. Toho's other choice was war veteran Ishiro Honda. You see, Honda was very interested in films earlier on in his life, so he attended Nihon University to apply for the art department's film program. He was accepted in 1931. However, because of the rising tensions in China, he was drafted into the Imperial Army in 1934, even after becoming assistant director. Years later, during World War II, Honda witnessed a near-death experience when a mortar shell landed right next to him, but the bomb never went off. He then later took the shell with him when the war was over. So, his time in the war and witnessing the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, resulting in him turning into a pacifist, made him the ideal director for the movie's anti-nuclear message. Honda was offered the idea and he accepted it. Now, this will be the part where I talk about the composer, but I'm saving him for later. So, you have your crew and your cast. The only thing left is the design and the name of the creature. Now, the origin of the name of the creature has been hotly debated over the years. One story has one of the employees coming up with the name Gojira, a combination of the words gorilla and kujira, meaning whale. Now tell me if that makes any sense to you at all. Another story has Kimi Honda, Ishiro's wife, saying that the name was just made up on the fly. Either way, it was the official name that was given to the creature. Next was the design. Early concept art of the creature was submitted by Kazuyoshi Abe. However, his drawings were rejected because its head looked like a mushroom cloud. Very, very, very subtle, dude. And then, under Tsuburaya's supervision, designers Taizo Toshimitsu and Akira Watanabe created the final design for the monster by combining the early designs of a Tyrannosaurus rex, or iguanodon, and the dorsal fins of a stegosaurus. And then, there was another issue. Tsuburaya originally wanted Godzilla to be portrayed in stop-motion animation, but after realizing that it would take 8 years to complete it, Eiji decided a second option, a big rubber suit. Brothers Kanji and Koei Yagi constructed the prototype Godzilla suit using bamboo, chicken wire, and latex rubber. So the suit is made, but who's going to be the one inside it? Enter Haruo Nakajima and Katsumi Tezuka. Yet that too created some more problems. Upon getting into the suit for almost 5 minutes, Nakajima collapsed from heat exhaustion because the prototype weighed 220 pounds and barely moved because of the hardened latex rubber. So the brothers constructed a new suit, this time using foam, cotton, smaller amounts of bamboo, and liquid plastic for its skin. For the next few months, it was a long and arduous process of shooting the scenes and taking breaks in between. And props to Nakajima, whom himself said that he had lost about 20 pounds during shooting. Not a weight loss program that I would recommend. Anyway, when I come back from this 2-minute break, I will dive right into the story itself. Alright, so keep in mind that I can't memorize the story from just watching the movie, so I'm just gonna read the plot off of Wikipedia. Also, massive spoilers are up ahead, you haven't been warned. When the Japanese freighter, the Ikumaru, is destroyed near Odo Island, another ship, the Bingomaru, is sent to investigate, only to meet the same fate with few survivors. A fishing boat from Odo is also destroyed, with one survivor. Fishing catches mysteriously drop to zero, blamed by an elder on the ancient sea creature known as Godzilla. Reporters arrive on the island to further investigate. A villager tells one of the reporters that something in the sea is ruining the fishing. That evening, a storm strikes the island, destroying the reporter's helicopter, and Godzilla, briefly seen, destroys 17 homes and kills 9 people and 20 of the villagers' livestock. Other residents travel to Tokyo to demand disaster relief. The villagers' and reporters' evidence describes damage consistent with something large crossing the village. The government sends paleontologist Kyohei Yamane to lead an investigation on the island, where giant radioactive footprints and a trilobite are discovered. The village alarm bell is rung, and Yamane and the villagers rush to see the monster, only to retreat after seeing said monster when it turns out to be a giant dinosaur. Yamane presents his findings in Tokyo, estimating that Godzilla, that's the name he gave to the creature, is about 50 meters tall or 165 feet for those of you who do not use a measure system, and is evolved from an ancient sea creature becoming a terrestrial creature. He then concludes that Godzilla has been disturbed by underwater hydrogen bomb tests. Debate ensues about notifying the public about the danger of the monster. Meanwhile, 17 more ships are lost at sea. Yeah, you might want to make that decision now, please. 10 frigates are dispatched to attempt to kill the monster using depth charges. The mission disappoints Yamane, who wants Godzilla to be studied. Are you sure you want to study a monster like that? Because when Godzilla survives the attack, officials appeal to Yamane for ideas to kill the monster. But Yamane tells them that Godzilla is unkillable, having survived H-bomb testing and must be studied. Yamane's daughter, Emiko, decides to break off her arranged engagement to Yamane's colleague, Tatsuki Serizawa, because her love for Hideo Ogata, a salvage ship captain. When a reporter arrives and asks to review Serizawa, Emiko escorts the reporter to Serizawa's home. After Serizawa refuses to divulge his current work to the reporter, he gives Emiko a demonstration of his recent project, on the condition that she must keep it a secret. The demonstration horrifies her, and she leaves without mentioning the engagement. You had one job, and you screwed it up. Good job. Shortly after she returns home, Godzilla resurfaces from Tokyo Bay and attacks Shinagawa. After attacking a passing train, he returns to the ocean. A continuing trend where trains get the shit end of the stick. After consulting with international experts who finally decided to open their ears, the Japanese self-defense forces construct a 3-meter tall and 50,000 volt electrified fence along the coast and deploy forces to stop and kill Godzilla. I know Japan is efficient and all that, but there is no way, no how that they will be able to build all of those in one single day. No way. Dismayed that there is no plan to study Godzilla for its resistance to radiation, Yamane returns home where Emiko and Ogata await, hoping to get his consent from them to wed. Well, when Ogata disagrees with Yamane, arguing that the threat that Godzilla poses outweighs any potential benefits from studying the monster, Yamane tells him to leave. So much for getting his consent. And then it happens. Godzilla resurfaces and breaks through the fence to Tokyo with his atomic breath, the first time it is ever seen, by the way, unleashing more destruction across the city. Further attempts to kill the monster with tanks and fighter jets fail, and Godzilla returns to the ocean. The day after, hospitals and shelters are crowded with the maimed and the dead, with some survivors suffering from radiation sickness. Distraught by all of the devastation, Emiko tells Ogata about Serizawa's research, a weapon called the Oxygen Destroyer, which disintegrates oxygen atoms and causes organisms to die of a rotting, how do you say this word? Asphyxiation. There we go. Emiko and Ogata go to Serizawa to convince him, to use the Oxygen Destroyer, but he initially refuses, explaining that if he uses the device, the superpowers of the world will surely force him to construct more oxygen destroyers for use as a superweapon. After watching a program displaying the nation's current tragedy, Serizawa finally accepts their pleas, and as he burns his notes, Emiko realizes what's about to happen, and she breaks down crying. A Navy ship takes Ogata and Serizawa to plant the device in Tokyo Bay. After finding Godzilla, Serizawa unloads the device and cuts off his air support, taking the secret of the oxygen destroyer to his grave. The menace is gone, but many mourn Serizawa's death. Yamane believes that if more nuclear tests continues, another Godzilla may rise in the future. Apparently somebody didn't get the message. When I come back from a 2.5 minute break, I will dive into how the movie did at the box office, what the critics and audiences think, and my personal thoughts on said movie. In the meantime, here is God's Gonna Come. Obvious enough, judging by the plot I read out to you, the movie symbolizes the nuclear holocaust in Japan's perspective. Even producer Tanaka confirmed it, stating, "The theme of the film from the beginning was the terror of the bomb. Mankind had created the bomb, and now nature was going to take revenge on mankind." Ishiro Honda would take it a step forward when he shot the Tokyo Rampage scene to make it look like the aftermath of the atomic bombs, stating, "If Godzilla had been a regular dinosaur or some other animal, he would have been killed by just one cannonball. But if he were equal to an atomic bomb, we wouldn't know what to do. So I took the characteristics of an atomic bomb and applied them to Godzilla." Unfortunately, the theme and messages, while noticeable, did not hit some critics. Yeah, speeding car just interrupted me, thanks. Keep going. Prior to the film's release, it was shown to the critics of Japan. They accused it of being an exploit of the destruction that the nation itself received. This left Honda completely distraught, stating years later in Tokyo Journal, they called it grotesque junk and said it looked like something you'd spit up. I felt sorry for my crew because they had worked so hard. At the time, they wrote things like, "This movie is absurd because such giant monsters do not exist." However, opinions on the film did not stop the people to see it. Godzilla was released on November 3rd, 1954, and during its theatrical run, it earned 9.6 million tickets, becoming the 8th highest grossing film of that year. And Honda realizes that Japanese critics' opinions are changing because of its theatrical distribution in the United States. More on that later. It didn't win Best Picture, but it did win Best Special Effects. Now, with all of that said, let's get into my thoughts. Let's be honest. Is there anything new that hasn't been said already? Obviously, it pioneered the giant monster genre in a lot of ways. Although, it's just mere inches from being perfect. First things first, the story here is well thought out and written with such care, but a few continuity errors caught my eye. For example, the high-tension showers being built in a few short hours. How? I'm not gonna let that go. Also, there are some awkward camera cuts. That's not a lot, but they are there. The characters portrayed here are very simple and easy to understand. You can actually read what they are doing or thinking. And the actors and actresses, despite making their big screen debut, knocked it out of the park. No dull moment when they are on screen. So let's talk about the title character. Godzilla in this movie is a magnificent achievement in character and as a special effect. Not to give you too much detail, but his character is a vengeful animal. The humans bombed his habitat and baptized in radiation. So he does what any other animal would do. He lashes out. It's when he eventually dies is when you start to feel sympathy. Props to suit actor Haru Nakajima. Again, not a weight loss program that I would recommend. Also, speaking of props, it's clearly obvious that not every special effect holds up by today's standards. You can actually see some of the wire, and some effects do look a bit cheesy. But for the most part, it's an achievement for all of that hard work. To get back to Godzilla for a minute, his design works in this, in which if you look at him at the side, his eyes are staring down, giving off that look of hatred, vengeance. But to quote Jabba the Hong, that is until you look at him from the front and he looks like a dead Muppet. Speaking of, the puppet used in close-up shots really doesn't match well with the suit itself. It's a problem of inconsistency, especially when you really look at him from the front, derp eyes and all. Now, I think it would be a good time to go into detail about the music and its composer, Akira Ifukube. Ifukube was born 40 years earlier on May 31st. At age 14, he decided that he wants to be a composer after hearing a radio performance. Years later, in 1954, he was offered a job as a composer, and he accepted. With that said, his music in this movie is perfect and is easily the third best soundtrack ever.
Yeah, you heard me. Fight me, nerds.
Not a dull moment in this OST isn't worth listening to. My personal highlights are Attack Godzilla, Frigate March, the main title, and Prayer for Peace. But my personal favorite is The Fury of Godzilla. And he's also the one who created his iconic roar and footsteps. What he did was he took a bass, rubbed it with a leather glove. A few edits later, the result is this. That never gets old. And the footsteps was actually the sound of an ant box being knocked over and or kicked. Alright, listen, if you hear those sounds in a back alley or an open field, the first thing that you should do is run for your life! So yeah, the success of the movie made a big impact, especially when it was distributed in the United States. 2 years later, in 1956, the movie was re-edited for American audiences with the new title, Godzilla, King of the Monsters, 56th edition, starring Canadian actor Raymond Burr. Just like its Japanese counterpart, the American version was massively successful, despite American critics giving it harsh reviews at first. Let me touch upon that version briefly. Personally, it's actually alright, given its major flaws, but it didn't hurt my enjoyment of the film. It's inferior to its Japanese version, sure, but at least this version of the movie introduced Godzilla to a lot of future movie directors in the, well, future. And now, it's time for the final grade. Now, I do not rate things on a scale of 0 to 5 or 0 to 10. I do it from 0 to 100. So with that said, with its minor flaws, Godzilla 54 Edition earns my final grade of 97 dissolving skeletons out of 100. A must-own movie. And for its Americanized version, it gets 68 flashbacks out of 100. It's good enough for a rent. Now, these movies can be bought in Blu-ray format by the Criterion Collection or on HBO Max. You can actually start a free trial for 7 days. Hashtag not sponsored. Alright, that'll about do it for this first episode. Thank you all so much for listening, and I hope you'll join me on this journey as I go through over 30 monster movies. God help me. And if you want more content, then head on over to YouTube and subscribe to the Brumakian Productions YouTube channel. Your support will make a difference. This has been Demetrius signing off.